certainly part of my role. And one of the things that I came across, which was interesting, and I did raise it in the House of Assembly actually earlier this week, never did get a satisfactory response on it. But it was interesting. It's important for, I think, for to get out there, people understand, and that's prepaid funeral legislation. And this occured back in the year 2000. We had an incident. I don't know if you can recall it, Pete. I have a vague recollection of it. But there was a funeral home out in the West Coast, I believe it was out in Port aux Basques area, that basically there was a bunch of people that had paid in on prepaid insurance, and this would be mainly be, I would suggest, seniors and so on, for prepaid insurance for their funerals. And anyway, that particular business folded, and the person skipped town and so on, and at the end of the day, there was $500,000 of people's money that went with it. And at that particular time, the government of the day did step in, and the funeral home industry, to their credit, stepped in, and we had a development of prepaid funeral legislation.
Yes, I remember all this now that you mentioned it. The story comes back fairly clear. Yeah.
So basically, that legislation came into place, and the funeral homes and operators pay a fee to the provincial government, and the provincial government, through Service NL, have their legislation, and also pays for the staff and so on that are there to administer the program. And basically, all funeral homes that do prepaid insurance, they're supposed to submit audits on an annual basis to the government for their review, to ensure that all the monies that are being paid by people to the funeral homes for their funerals, to have them paid in advance, that all the monies that are collected go to the right place, that they're in a proper fund, and nothing untoward can happen like happened back in the year 2000.
Right.
And those audits are supposed to be submitted annually. So we looked at the stats. Of course, we don't have the stats yet for this year because it's not complete, but for 2013, and we found out that only 53% of the audits that were supposed to be submitted to government were actually submitted, which means almost 50% were not.
Wow, what's the penalty for not submitting your audit?
Well, I don't know if there's an actual fine, but from a legislative perspective, it's mandatory, and it's up to the government to enforce this. Now, one of the problems, I guess, that may have led to this, again, as part of the legislation and the agreement that was put in place and the fees that funeral home operators pay into the fund, it was supposed to fund a person within government, within Service NL, that would only be responsible for receiving the audits, reviewing them, and also for going out and doing routine audits and inspections of them on top of that, to again make sure everything is being done properly and being done above board. And that dedicated position does not exist. And I think what the department done is that they just sort of lumped it into a larger fund and a larger pool of employees that would do audits, like for insurance and for different things.
So they're taking money that was
dedicated to it. It's not being dedicated.
Taking money that was supposed to be specifically used for something and just putting it into general revenue and I guess paying a person to do the work, but not specifically funded by the program.
Correct. And obviously not all the work being done, because only about 50% of the audits last year were received, which means 50% were not received, which means that is putting consumers at risk once again for some kind of an untoward incident to happen. And I'm not suggesting, I really believe, I know many people in that industry, and, they're all good business people, and they, it's like anything else. I'm sure that if you had, in any type of business, if you had 1,000 people in the room, 999 of them are going to do things the right way and so on. But there's always that risk of somebody.
But we're talking 53%. That's a long way from.
Yeah, well, the thing is, we're talking. That doesn't necessarily mean that the other people who never submitted their audits are doing anything wrong.
No, but you don't know.
But it does mean that government is not checking to make sure they're doing it right.
Who's responsible? Who's the minister responsible?
That would be Minister Cornick, the Minister of Service, Newfoundland and Labrador.
Right.
And, of course, I asked the question in the House Assembly, and basically all I got is, we're concerned about, the standard sort of bluff answer, well, we're concerned about consumers, and we're concerned about, people that are paying this, and we're committed to doing things right. And sort of a top-of-the-trees answer, but really no solid answer on exactly why you do not have these audits in your possession, why you do not have a dedicated person making sure that the work is actually being done the way it's supposed to be done.
Yeah.
So, again, in my role as critic for that department, I have a responsibility to bring these issues forward. I've done so in the House Assembly. I'm doing so again this afternoon because, these regulations and legislations put in for a reason. In this case, we actually had an actual incident, so it's not like we're not talking about like theoretically something go wrong. Something actually did go wrong, and it was $500,000 that was involved, and that's why it was put in place to begin with. So if we're going to do that and correct that, and we're going to put legislation in place, then it's no good. It's not worth the paper it's written on if it's not enforced. And it appears that it's not being enforced to the degree that it is supposed to be enforced. And I certainly call upon the government and the minister to correct that situation as soon as possible in order to protect consumers. And we're not just talking consumers of just any normal product here. I mean, we're talking about people, at their most vulnerable time and, in a grieving process, trying to deal with, the loss of a loved one, and then to potentially have to deal with this kind of situation during that time is even amplified to be even, worse again. So,
well, I'm assuming that essentially people are still protected. It's the government that's not really keeping tabs on whether or not they're getting the money in the program that they're going to avail of every time that something like this might occur. So, and I agree also that concern is worthless unless it turns into action. So we have to ensure that we're doing the audits and making sure the program is running as it's supposed to. Good point.
That's why we have audits.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's in the legislation. Well, we'll take an opportunity to speak to Mr. Cornick at some point and just see where we are and whether or not, first of all, the person that's supposed to be looking at this is in place or will be in place, and regardless of whether or not right now they're doing the job, if the province is satisfied that the audits are sufficient and that the money is being correctly accounted for.
Yep, absolutely, and I look forward to hearing a response from the minister, and I thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, sir. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Pete. Have a great afternoon.